Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. It's 2021. You can imagine this news headline on the TV, radio, or on your phone. Heart disease still public enemy number one, but COVID now second leading cause of death worldwide. I don't know why I read it like a 1920s newsboy, because it was 2021 I said that. But anyway, you presumably would click on the link or keep tuning in to hear more about COVID and how many people it's killed in 2021. And you might think, wait, still public enemy number one? Hang on, what is that? Well, that seems like an old-fashioned thing, which maybe is just me and why I read it in a 1920s newsboy accent. But that's the kind of thing that I've still heard that phrase used, public enemy number one. And I'm like, when did that happen? When did we start with public enemy number one? So that is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by this because it does seem like an old concept, but then I'm kind of going, well, I mean, how long has there been the public to have an enemy?
Yeah, exactly. So according to the Oxford English Dictionary, public enemy number one means, quote, that which poses the greatest threat to the welfare or security of a community, nation, etc., end quote. The phrase was often stylized as the words public and enemy, and then capital N and lowercase o as shorthand for the word number, and then the numeral 1. And this was probably to save on print costs for newspapers and newswire services, which I am giving you a little bit of a hint as to when public enemy number one was coined. But the concept of public enemies, a person who poses a threat to a society, has been around long before English. In Rome, the Senate pronounced Emperor Nero as hostis publicus, which effectively translates to an enemy of the people or public enemy. And public enemy has a long history in English too, as the European English speakers used the phrase since at least the early 1700s. And I found this in Irish newspapers and British newspapers, the phrase public enemy being used to define a person or a gang or a group or, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But we are talking about public enemy as a ranked system. So the public enemy number one, that's the phrase we're looking at, not just public enemy. And we can pretty much narrow down to the year when and why the phrase public enemy number one entered the English lexicon. And that year is 1930. This is thanks to Frank J. Lausch, who at the time was the president of the Chicago Crime Commission. And on April 24th, 1930, his public enemy list that was sent to every law enforcement agency in the Chicago area was published in the newspapers. And the headline of the Chicago Tribune read, quote, list 28 as public enemies, end quote. The Chicago Tribune ran the list of people in alphabetical order and made no mention of the rankings, but Lausch talks about the fact that he had ranked these, and others started to use this rankings as well. I don't know if there was maybe a concern from the Tribune's editorial piece that they didn't want to list them in order, or maybe the fact that public enemy number one at the time was not someone they wanted to irk off, potentially. Mm-hmm. So they kind of buried his name in there. But if you are familiar with the 1930s and Chicago crime and the gangster era, then you may already know what I'm about to say. But nearly every newspaper I could find ran a story that day, April 24th, 1930, ran some sort of a story on the subject, and most mentioned Alfonso Capone, Al Capone, as being at the top of the list. I just didn't see any, though, that mentioned the phrase public enemy number one just yet. But that idea was set.
That's who I would have gone to, I think, for...
Is it?
No, not like I thought that was where it came from, but just that as you were talking, I'm
Oh,
like,
right.
you
Once you get
know,
the
it's like,
context
oh,
clues, right?
yeah, like Al
Yeah.
Capone, of course.
Of course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
Al Capone. That makes
naturally.
sense.
And he's like the ideal, idea of that too.
Sure. I would imagine many of you actually have a different name in mind, and we're going to get there. But
Okay.
because there's two different components to this Public Enemy number one thing that I found fascinating as we looked through the history here. In Lawrence Beergreen's 1994 biography, Capone, The Man in the Era, he notes why the concept of Al Capone being public enemy number one was such a rage across the United States. Quote, although everyone knew Al Capone the bootlegger, few realized he was also a pimp. Now, courtesy of Frank J. Lausch, everyone knew exactly who Capone was. Public enemy number one. The label struck a chord in a nation racked by the Depression, and Capone now became a scapegoat for all sorts of social ills. No longer was he indulged as a symptom of these ills, he was now perceived as the cause. Thanks to Lausch's publicity stunt, Al Capone became the first great American criminal of the 20th century. End quote.
Okay.
So Beer Green used the phrase to describe Capone, but it wasn't until October of 1930 that I actually was able to find the phrase in print somewhere. And it may have been used between April 1930, April 24th, so late April of 1930 when the list came out, and then October 10th, which is where I see it. It may have very well been used somewhere, but not all the newspapers are digitized. Some of them are, even if they were digitized from microfilm that's not very readable. So it's entirely possible that it popped up there, and it may have been used in radio broadcasts and that kind of stuff. I don't have, and if any of you listeners are aware of a resource where I could go search through radio archives, that are a searchable database, I'd love to, see what's happening there too and what might have been talked about. But I just couldn't find anything in between there until October 10th, 1930. The first one I found was out of the Montana Standard, and this references the arrest of Ralph Capone and calls him public enemy number two. And the article has this to say about his older brother, Al. Quote, so off to a cell, police trundled the resplendent younger brother of Scarface Al, who is public enemy number one. End quote.
Okay.
So we know the literal use of public enemy number one began in 1930. But you, like I did when I first looked into this phrase, might be saying, wait a minute, I thought the public enemy list was an FBI thing. And for that, we're going to turn back to Lawrence Beergreen's biography. Quote, at the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover also took note of the public enemies list. Always jealous of publicity, he adapted Lausch's list into an FBI register of the nation's most wanted criminals, to be updated as circumstances dictated. In time, the concept of a public enemies list became so closely identified with the FBI and Hoover that Lausch's role as the originator of the concept was all but forgotten. End quote.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Shauna, any guesses on who or when the first public enemy number one was for the FBI? And you've got your hint there with it being J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, I'm bad at timelines like that.
Who do you think it might have been? Any thoughts?
No, this is terrible. I should know,
That's
but I
okay.
don't.
Those of you screaming at your podcast players now are probably correct. It is John Dillinger.
Oh.
And here is a note from a PBS special on Dillinger, who was a notorious bank robber and apparently lovable scamp. Quote, on his 31st birthday, June 22nd, 1934, Dillinger was declared America's first public enemy number one. The following day, the federal government promised a $10,000 reward for his capture and a $5,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. End quote.
Okay.
So I do say lovable scamp here because the PBS biography said he was a folk hero to Americans disillusioned with failing banks and the ineffective federal government. So that's an interesting piece. And, there were a lot of people who really liked Dillinger. And Part of the difficulty with the gangster problem in the 1930s, from some of the stuff that I've read, is that many people were disillusioned because of the depression, and so they were in some ways rooting for people who they thought were only causing problems for others, right? For the one percenters, or for the, oh, they're just stealing money. He's stealing money from banks, but he's not stealing money from me, right? That money's insured or whatever. That money's coming off from rich people. So that's the kind of a thing that a lot of people were thinking of, right? Which is why it was so important for Lausch to be able to label Capone in this way, to say that he was such a public enemy number one, because people understood the concepts of public enemies, and that really changed the tone for turning the public against Al Capone. And that's what Hoover was trying to do here with creating this list and declaring John Dillinger as public enemy number one from a national standpoint, a nationwide standpoint in the United States.
Okay.
So that's literal stuff, right? But if
Yeah.
Capone was public enemy number one in 1930, at least for Chicago, and then Dillinger became the FBI's first public enemy number one in 1934, when did we start using public enemy number one in a metaphorical sense? Well, that happened quite quickly, and it happened before the FBI got involved. Here is an example of the title being applied to a concept rather than a specific person. And this is from a Fire Prevention Week ad by the Juneau Chamber of Commerce in the Daily Alaska Empire, dated October 8th, 1932.
Okay.
So literally less than 2 years from the first time I saw it in print.
Wow.
We see it here being used figuratively now, or at least as a broader concept than a person who is a public enemy. Quote, "Fire is public enemy number one. Every man, woman, and child should be constantly aware of and on guard against fire hazards." End quote. I actually continued to see this phrase, fire is public enemy number one, being used with reference to Fire Prevention Week in newspapers at least through the 1960s. So I was kind of surprised. I don't know if it was a regular thing or if they, it was kind of a repeat every couple of years they trotted it out, but
Yeah, like that was kind of their catchphrase or whatever. That's really interesting. And I mean, reading about fires from the past, fires definitely public enemy number one. Like, ugh.
Yeah, well, and we still do Fire Prevention Month and a Fire Prevention Week in October every year now in the United States as well. So that's a thing that's still continued on. I don't know when it started, but I was kind of surprised to see an ad for it in 1932. I didn't realize it had been going on so long.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Here's one out of the Rotarian, which is the magazine of the Rotary International. And this is in their September 1934 edition. This article has a dateline of East Orange, New Jersey. Quote, "Public enemy number one is the reckless driver. East Orange Rotarians were shown recently at a meeting devoted to public safety. Various men prominent in city government explained the local situation, and a film demonstrating vividly the causes of many traffic accidents was shown." End quote. All right, so they obviously didn't have cell phones at that point. So, but reckless driving, I guess, not paying attention, that kind of thing. Maybe that was what it was, or just not following the rules. I don't know when traffic rules started. Probably before that, because you had horse-drawn carriages that you had to deal with before.
Right. So there were at least kind of general rules, I'm sure.
Right. Even Broadway got into the act in 1934 with Cole Porter writing a song for the musical Anything Goes, and that song was called Public Enemy Number One. Public Enemy Number One was also a title applied to a character in the musical because the person in question is thought to be the most wanted criminal. Once it is learned that Public Enemy Number One is on board, the crew is actually delighted because it means they're going to sell out tickets for years to come because everyone wants to sail on this now famous ship because of Public Enemy Number One being on board. Here are the closing lyrics from the song. Quote, "Public enemy number one, thank thee for everything thou hast done. Blessings on thee, thou noble chap, for putting this boat of ours on the map. Thank thee heartily, holy man, for taking this liner American. For henceforth we'll be crowded on every run, due to thee, public enemy number one. Amen." end quote.
Nice.
This was the USS American is the name of the boat. If you remember it slightly differently, Anything Goes was rewritten after this, and there were some major changes, and then it's been rewritten a couple of times for some minor changes as well. So if you remember things slightly differently from seeing the musical Anything Goes, there've been changes over the years.
Been changes.
Yes, so
Nice.
don't come at me, Broadway folks. All right, this next one, 1935, has yet another example. This is out of the January edition, 1935, of The Forecast, America's leading food and health magazine. Quote, a new list of public enemies has been compiled in Washington, but it has nothing to do with gunmen and kidnappers. It's a list of diseases against which the Public Health Service is fighting. Heart disease ranks as public enemy number 1. End quote. Heart disease is still the leading cause of death in the United States and worldwide, according to figures from 2022 and according to the provisional figures from 2023. For public enemy number 1, the point is we went from creating the phrase in 1930 to seeing it used figuratively in a variety of ways in just 2 years' time. And so I highlighted from 1932 to 1935 just a very small snippet of the numerous examples in which it was used to apply to something that wasn't a person, but some sort of a conceptual threat. And I think that's really interesting because this is a rapidly moving phrase from the time frame it pops into the minds of English speakers to the time that it is just being used nationwide. It is
Right.
it's amazing to me how quickly this spread. Let's look at a couple more uses as we get further away from its genesis or origin, so we can see examples of its use as we get closer to modern times. In April 7th, 1943, the Twin Cities Ordinance News out of Minnesota, USA, residents were asked who they thought was public enemy number 1. The result was this headline, quote, Hitler outscores Hirohito as public enemy number 1, end quote. But that's not necessarily surprising. Obviously, this is in the throes of World War II, so both of those men would have been people that they would have considered, right? And U.S. was in the throes of World War II at this time, mostly because of the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. So there's that piece here. I find this one statement though very interesting in here. This woman identified as Rosemary Warcall. She was a primer insert operator on A shift in Building 501 for this particular shift, which is where this Twin Cities Ordinance, the news from that location. Quote, public enemy number 1 is the man or woman who is absent from a war job without any good reason, end quote. So
Okay.
a lot of citizens felt like it was all hands on deck to accomplish victory in the war against fascism during this time frame because they had been attacked on Pearl Harbor, so that was an attack on U.S. soil. That hadn't happened in any of their lifetimes, and that drug them into World War II. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but it was certainly the catalyst. And a lot of the average person, they were working, those who weren't serving in the armed forces were serving at home, building things or whatever. And so her take was that people who were shirking those responsibilities were a menace to society.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I could certainly see where she was coming from on that front.
Yeah. I mean, if you feel like everybody else is doing their part in the
Right, and
group
somebody's not
project.
pulling their load.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at a really small extent, we've all felt that in either a group project in school at some point or at work, and there's this one person who's not pulling
Right.
their load, and you just
Or
want
like
to.
even your friend group, and there's that one that just never brings snacks. I mean,
Oh,
like,
right, yeah,
it's
exactly, yeah.
like-
So, yeah, we've all seen that person who's a bit of a slacker, and this was obviously a bit more seriousness to it, but yeah.
Right.
Well, here's another example of a disease with our label. This time, it's from the Madison County Democrat out of Ohio, USA, and this is dated January 1st, 1954. Quote, the successful outcome of these tests would mean that quantities of the new serum would be made available to children and grown-ups of all ages, and this would be the end of paralytic polio, children's public enemy number 1, end quote.
Yeah.
So, to put this news in context, the World Health Organization noted the outbreak of polio in 1952 in the United States was the worst in the nation's history. So, news to start 1954 progress was quite welcome. By 1955, vaccinations were being given freely. And by 1957, cases had dropped from 58,000 a year to 5,600 a year.
Wow.
That's more than a 90% decrease thanks to vaccinations. And by 1961, only 161 cases remained. In a 1955 interview, just a year after this quote, Jonas Salk was asked about the patent for the vaccine, and his response showcases how important vaccines are in the world and how true it is that vaccines save lives. Quote, well, the people, I would say, there is no patent. Could you patent the sun? End quote. Salk was
Wow.
a brilliant man, and we're going to look a little deeper into him in the behind the scenes video that airs every Friday on our Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. We wouldn't be able to do the behind the scenes video or even this show if it weren't for our patrons. So before we move to our more modern uses, we need to give them a shout out.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesdays see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls, and Fridays are our lightly edited behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by Shauna, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
Well, there are tons of modern materials talking about Public Enemy number 1 from the perspective of a look back at 1930s gangsters. But I'm going to avoid those and instead look at usages in other ways. We're going to start out with several songs, but we'll see a few other art forms and expressions in the mix. First up is Public Enemy number 1. This is a song by Motley Crue off of their 1981 album, Too Fast for Love. Here are the opening lyrics, quote, you and me, we're gonna escape tonight, on the run under the moonlight. Don't think about nothing, no, don't think about nothing. Tragedy running the red light, hear the screams, another one dies tonight. Don't think about nothing, don't think about nothing, end quote. The last half of the chorus is the repetition of Public Enemy number 1 several times.
I don't know that I pay attention to lyrics as much as I maybe should.
The song is called Public Enemy number 1.
Yeah, I just, whatever. It's like, it's a catchy tune.
The next one I'm going to read is actually where I thought we might have seen it first in like these modern usage, and I'm not really sure that I recognize. I've heard the Public Enemy number 1 from Motley Crue once I'd listened to it, and we linked to it on the show notes, so and on Patreon, so you can take a look too. But once I listened to it, I was like, oh, okay, I have heard this song, and I've not really paid attention to the lyrics. But the one that I thought that would be the first is this 1987 song by Public Enemy off of their album Yo Bum Rush, The Show. And Public Enemy is a rap group with original members Chuck D, Flava Flav, Professor Griff, and Terminator X. In 2023, Billboard rated Public Enemy as the 6th best rap group of all time. Here is the final verse of their song, Public Enemy number 1. Quote, for all you suckers, liars, your cheap amplifiers, you crossed up wires are always starting fires. For you grown-up criers, now here's a pair of pliers, get a job like your mother, I heard she fixes old dryers. You have no desires, your father fixes tires. Do you try to sell your equipment, but you get no buyers. It's you they never hire, you're never on flyers. 'Cause you and your crew is only known as good triers. Known as the poetic lyrical son, I'm Public Enemy number 1, end quote.
Yeah.
And I will just apologize to Chuck D and every fan of Public Enemy because there's no way I could do that as well as he did.
I do like I always love that like I love that line.
Yeah,
Known as the poetic lyrical son. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's great.
Yeah. All that happened in my head while you were doing that though was Flava Flav.
Flava Flav. Yeah, yeah. He's still doing some great things. He and Snoop Dogg were hype men at the latest Olympics for the U.S. teams. Man, and
Yes.
Flava Flav was always a great hype. I mean, he was a hype man for Public Enemy, so like he's always been good at that. I'm just
Yeah.
really excited to see that he's still doing it.
Yep, me too.
Well, Public Enemy number one is a song by Eminem off the 2006 album Eminem Presents the Re-Up. The song is about the dangers of any artist who pushes boundaries with their art. It references the assassinations of Tupac and JFK as public figures who were pushing those boundaries in their areas of influence. The song begins as the singer quickly disconnects a phone call, and then he raps, quote, I sense someone's tapping into my phone, so I do. I got this feeling in my bones I might die soon. The FBI might be trying to pull my file soon. I might be walking blindfold into a typhoon. I might be seeing rockets light up the night sky, right outside the window of my living room. And if they do, then you can say goodnight and bye-bye to them iTunes. If I don't try to record as much before as I do, the plan is to have as many in the can as I can, as I stand before you in this booth, a walking dead man. End quote. The song ends with the line, you have become Public Enemy number one.
Man, he's so good.
Hip hop has so much amazing lyrical content to offer. And I think that there are people who don't enjoy that style of music who are drastically missing out on some really amazing art forms, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think if they maybe if they're like into poetry but they're not into to rap or
Right,
something,
right. Just read the
read it.
lyrics. Just read
Yeah.
the lyrics. But I mean, there
Especially
is
somebody like
something.
Eminem because his like you can read as poetry.
Oh yeah.
It's so good.
Well, and there is something to the delivery. Obviously, I mean,
For
no
sure.
one is confusing my delivery with Eminem's. You know.
That's true.
All right, here's a song called Public Enemy number one, and this is by the band Megadeth,
Oh,
and this is
nice.
off of their 2011 album 13, so named because it was their 13th studio album. Real original Megadeth.
Hey, leave him be. Okay.
Here is a snippet of the lyrics. Quote, Public Enemy number one, watch the authorities come undone. With every standoff that I've won, flirting death just for fun. Public Enemy number one, born a fugitive father's son. Another heist of bank is done, and the trouble has just begun. End quote.
Yep.
Okay, are you ready for something completely different for this next one?
I was enjoying the music, but sure.
All right, here we go. I need all of you to listen. This is a ride. Abe Lincoln, Public Enemy number one, is a 2013 novel by Bill Walker and Brian Anthony. And no, it's not anti-Lincoln statement about how the South will rise again or something like that. But it is a wild ride. Here's the synopsis from the publisher. I am so excited to present this to you all. Quote, when John Wilkes Booth shoots Lincoln with a bullet cursed by the notorious Chicken Man, a local voodoo practitioner, he unwittingly sets in motion a chain of events extending far into the future. Instead of killing Lincoln, the bullet puts the president in a coma for 68 years, his body remaining limber and ageless. When he awakens in 1933, Abe Lincoln is a man out of time, a revered icon, and a political pariah. FDR and J. Edgar Hoover not only do not want him around, they want him to retire. But their plan to be rid of him backfires, and Lincoln is on the run, a fugitive from justice. Determined to reach Chicago and retrieve the small fortune left in trust for him by his long-dead son, Lincoln discovers that Hoover has confiscated all his money, leaving him destitute. With Bureau of Investigation agent Melvin Purvis in hot pursuit, Lincoln finds his way to a hobo camp where he befriends a young runaway who agrees to accompany the former president back to Washington. There, Lincoln hopes that Hannah Wheelhouse, the Chicken Man's granddaughter, can help him find the peace he longs for. Then fate deals Lincoln another strange hand when he and the boy end up as hostages to infamous bank robber John Dillinger. Instead of leaving them by the side of the road after the robbery, Dillinger takes a liking to Lincoln and invites him to join the gang, promising him he'll get all his money back. Will Lincoln survive long enough to recapture his fortune and get away, or will he be hunted down in a manner unbefitting of a martyred president? End quote.
What?
I promised you a wild ride there.
I still don't know what happened.
I might actually just read this book for the ridiculous zaniness it must hold.
I need to find out what exactly they're trying to say.
Yeah, I was really nervous that it was going to be like a Confederacy thing, but no, when they were like Abe Lincoln, Public Enemy #1, I was like, ugh, I don't think I'm going to be using this. Well, that's weird. And it's like every paragraph was a wild turn of events again.
Yeah, because I'm like the Chicken Man, and then it's voodoo, not or what?
Yeah, voodoo.
But wait, what?
Yeah, this whole thing, man. Anyway.
Okay, because there's also like some future time
and John Dillinger somehow.
There's time travel.
There's no time travel. He was just in a coma for 60 some odd years.
Fine. It's just weird.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not trying to take anything away from that. Public Enemy #1 is a 2019 documentary film directed by Robert Ripberger and also had actor Ice-T as an executive producer. Here's the synopsis. Well, hang on. Let me just note before you all write in and tell me about this. I know Ice-T is more than just an actor. That I was just going for simplicity, but I've realized as I said it that he is a multimedia artist. But here's the synopsis from the trailer on the YouTube channel. Quote, "This eye-opening feature documentary digs deeper into the question of why America has kept this half-century-long war by focusing primarily on the policies around marijuana, where it all began. What were Nixon's motives for starting the war on drugs? And why did he designate marijuana as one of the most dangerous drugs of all time? But most importantly, how did it evolve into a self-perpetuating, constantly expanding policy disaster?" End quote. Everyone that I saw talked really highly of this as a pretty eye-opening documentary. Well, to wrap up, I will mention this answer I saw on Quora from user Siva Kumar Bakodi, and this was posted in 2022. The question was, what is an act of the public enemy? And like most respondents, this one answered a slightly different question. Quote, "You are asking who is the public enemy #1 in India today? Well, it is not a person. It is the negativity of our society. One particularly poisonous and extremely dangerous change I see in our society today is we no longer distinguish between a person and an issue. We no longer say, that particular thing you said or did, I don't like that. We say, I don't like you." End quote.
Well, I don't think they're wrong.
I think that is a powerful observation.
Yeah.
And while that post is about India, I think the sentiment is relevant for probably many nations. Well, that's about all we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It is poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, what are the best pizza toppings? Top tier toppings were pepperoni, mushrooms, sausage, black olives, and spinach. Not necessarily all at the same time, though that would be good. Jan said, quote, "If just for me, anchovies, black olives, and onions. The rest of the family won't stand for that, so we usually order something else. I'm definitely pro pineapple on pizza." End quote. Heather added, quote, "Like Kevin McAllister in Home Alone, I'm plain cheese pizza all the way." End quote.
And Emily said, quote, "My favorite combo is chicken, spinach, and sun-dried tomatoes with a white sauce." End quote. That sounds great, Emily. My favorite pizza is a chicken and Canadian bacon on white sauce. Sometimes I get light cheese because the white sauce is often an Alfredo blend, so it doesn't necessarily need all the normal cheese. Also, my body can only handle so much lactose. I love grilled onions on pizza, but I don't like raw onions, so I need the onions to be either grilled or caramelized before going on the pizza if I'm going to eat them.
Mary added, quote, I can't have cheese, so if they have a dairy-free garlic crust topping, that is awesome too. End quote. Sounds good. I am allergic to almost all of the things that make pizza, so I make mine from scratch with alternatives, but I load it up with all of the veggies, especially peppers and olives, and then add some spinach and basil. And so I think basil is what makes it really awesome and is my favorite topping out of them. Well, as a reminder, our silly polls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid. And patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Till then, remember,
Words belong to their users.